Detective Mark Stevens never expected a routine traffic stop with driver Lisa Carmichael to uncover a chilling secret. Two bodies hidden in her trunk, setting off a terrifying investigation that would unravel decades of dark mysteries. On a quiet, ordinary evening, the streets of a sleepy suburban town seemed calm and uneventful. Police officers patrolled the highways, keeping watch for anything out of the ordinary. One officer, driving a cruiser along a stretch of highway, noticed a car that didn't quite seem to be driving normally. The vehicle was weaving slightly between lanes, almost as if the driver was distracted or struggling to maintain control. This behavior caught the officer's attention, and he decided to perform a routine traffic stop. The car slowed and pulled over to the side of the road. It was an older model sedan, and the driver was a woman who appeared to be in her mid-40s. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she wore plain clothing. As the officer approached the vehicle, he observed that she seemed unusually calm, almost too calm for someone who had just been pulled over by the police. The windows were heavily tinted, making it hard to see inside clearly. A faint, strange smell drifted from the trunk area, but the officer couldn't identify it right away. He asked the woman for her driver's license and registration. She fumbled nervously with her purse, avoiding eye contact and seeming reluctant to provide the documents. The officer's instincts began to raise questions. Something wasn't right. The woman's behavior was inconsistent with the calm exterior she showed. He asked her to step out of the car, explaining it was just a precaution. She complied but moved stiffly, almost as if she were hiding something. The officer called for backup, informing dispatch of the unusual circumstances. 2 more units arrived within minutes. As the officers gathered around, the lead officer decided to take a closer look at the trunk. When he opened it, the air that escaped was thick and carried the scent of something foul. Inside, carefully wrapped in old blankets and plastic sheeting, were 2 bodies. The shock of this discovery rippled through the officers immediately. The bodies were positioned side by side, and although they were covered, it was clear they had been hidden there deliberately. The woman was immediately detained and handcuffed. She showed no visible reaction, no tears, no fear, no anger, just a blank stare that made the officers uneasy. The quiet road suddenly felt charged with tension as paramedics and detectives were called to the scene. The area was secured, and forensic teams arrived to begin collecting evidence. News of the arrest and the horrifying discovery spread quickly throughout the community. People who knew the woman were stunned. She had lived in the neighborhood for years without raising suspicion. The investigation was just beginning, but this initial stop would change everything. What seemed like a routine traffic violation had uncovered a nightmare hidden inside an ordinary car trunk, and the true story behind it was about to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. The discovery of the bodies in the woman's trunk sent shockwaves through the police department and the surrounding community. The immediate priority was identifying the victims, a task that proved challenging due to the condition in which the bodies were found. Wrapped tightly and concealed beneath layers of blankets and plastic, they showed signs of having been in the trunk for weeks, maybe longer. Forensic experts carefully began the painstaking process of uncovering clues, examining fingerprints, dental records, and any unique physical characteristics that could help reveal who these women were. Initial reports suggested the victims were young women, but their identities remained a mystery. As police cross-referenced missing persons reports from nearby areas, they found 2 cases that seemed to align with the timing and general description of the bodies. Both women had disappeared without a trace in recent weeks, and their families had been desperately searching for answers. The possibility that these were the same missing women brought a flicker of hope that the mystery might be solved quickly. But as the investigation progressed, it became clear this case was far more complicated than it first appeared. Autopsies revealed troubling details. The women had been restrained before their deaths, but there were no clear signs of what had caused their demise. The cause of death was difficult to determine, as the bodies showed signs of decomposition that complicated the examination. What stood out were strange markings on their skin, patterns that forensic specialists believed could be ritualistic or symbolic in nature. These markings suggested the women had endured more than just physical restraint. There was an element of cruelty or obsession involved. The police turned their attention back to the suspect, the woman caught with the bodies in her trunk. Her calm demeanor during arrest had already raised suspicions, and now detectives were digging into her background. Surprisingly, her record was almost spotless. No prior arrests or accusations that could hint at violent behavior. She had lived quietly in the community, holding a low-profile job and rarely attracting attention. This made the situation even more unsettling. How could someone with such an ordinary exterior be connected to such a horrifying crime? Detectives questioned the woman repeatedly, but her answers were vague and evasive. She refused to admit any involvement, maintaining a silent, almost detached posture. This lack of cooperation slowed the investigation, forcing the team to rely heavily on forensic evidence and outside leads. Meanwhile, the families of the missing women were left in limbo, caught between hope and despair as they waited for confirmation of their loved one's fate. As days passed, new evidence began to emerge. Small items found in the trunk, pieces of jewelry, fragments of fabric, and a few photographs offered additional clues. Investigators hoped these would help build a clearer picture of what had happened before the women ended up in the trunk. It became apparent that the case involved more than just a simple crime of passion or impulse. It hinted at something darker, a disturbing story that stretched beyond what anyone had imagined. The community remained on edge, the shock of the discovery lingering in the air. Questions multiplied, and the search for answers intensified. Every detail mattered, every lead was chased as the investigation moved forward. The truth behind the bodies in the trunk was beginning to take shape, but it was still wrapped in layers of mystery and chilling uncertainty. As the investigation deepened, detectives began to peel back the layers of the woman's life, searching for connections and motives that might explain the grim discovery in her trunk. At first glance, she seemed like an ordinary person. She lived alone in a modest home on the edge of town and worked a quiet, unassuming job at a local office. Neighbors described her as reserved and private, someone who rarely socialized or drew attention to herself. Yet beneath this calm surface, a darker story was slowly coming to light. Police uncovered a trail of secrets that hinted at a hidden world behind the woman's facade. She had a history of moving frequently, hopping from town to town every few years. Each time she left behind little trace of her presence. Her background checks showed multiple aliases and fake identification documents, suggesting she had intentionally erased her past to avoid detection. Investigators suspected that this was not the first time she had been involved in something criminal, but previous crimes had gone unnoticed or unlinked to her. One of the most startling discoveries came when officers tracked down several storage units rented under one of her known aliases. Inside these dusty, dimly lit spaces, they found an unsettling collection of items. There were personal belongings belonging to missing women, handbags, pieces of jewelry, photographs, and even some clothing stained with unidentified substances. Among the belongings, the detectives uncovered journals filled with disturbing entries. The handwriting was meticulous, but the content revealed an obsessive mind fascinated by control, secrecy, and power. The journals detailed plans and thoughts that chilled the investigators. There were references to capturing and keeping people as trophies, descriptions of how to avoid suspicion, and a disturbing fascination with the idea of invisibility, living in plain sight without anyone realizing the horrors taking place. The woman seemed to take pride in her ability to manipulate those around her, maintaining a perfect mask while hiding unspeakable acts. Further forensic analysis linked some of the personal items found in the storage units directly to the bodies discovered in the trunk. This connection made it clear that the murders were premeditated and the victims had been held captive before their deaths. The careful wrapping of the bodies suggested the suspect treated these victims not just as crimes of passion, but as possessions to be hidden and controlled even after death. The investigation also uncovered digital evidence from the woman's computer and phone. Her browsing history included searches about disappearing without a trace, methods of restraint, and how to clean up crime scenes. Surveillance footage from convenience stores and gas stations showed her purchasing items that could be used to bind or conceal. These discoveries painted a chilling picture of planning and intent. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the woman remained mostly silent, refusing to cooperate or explain her actions. The more detectives learned, the clearer it became that the crimes were part of a much larger pattern, one that might involve more victims and a long history of deception. The quiet, ordinary woman with the calm demeanor was, in reality, hiding a deeply sinister side that had gone unnoticed for years. This chapter of the investigation revealed how evil can lurk beneath the surface of everyday life, how appearances can be deceiving, and how a routine traffic stop could unravel a hidden nightmare. The question now was how far this web of secrets extended and how many lives had been forever changed by her actions. Just when the investigation seemed to be settling into a grim but clear narrative, new information emerged that completely upended everything the police thought they knew. After weeks of painstaking forensic analysis, including DNA testing on the bodies found in the woman's trunk, the results shocked everyone involved. The victims were not who the detectives initially believed them to be. The two bodies were not the young women reported missing from nearby towns as first suspected. Instead, they matched the profiles of two women who had vanished decades earlier from a different state altogether. These cases had long been considered cold, with little to no leads for law enforcement. Suddenly, the discovery in the trunk breathed new life into those cold cases, reopening wounds for families who had waited years for answers. The realization that the suspect had crossed state lines and moved frequently took on new significance. Her pattern of relocating was no longer just a suspicious detail. It was now clear that she had used those moves to evade law enforcement for years. Detectives connected the dots and uncovered evidence suggesting she was involved in multiple disappearances, spanning not just years, but different regions of the country. The woman's true identity was even more elusive than previously thought, complicated by her use of false names and forged documents. Further digging revealed that the suspect had been involved in other suspicious incidents that were never linked to her until now. Old police reports and missing persons files from several states were reviewed with fresh eyes. Some cases had striking similarities. Women disappearing without a trace, no signs of struggle left behind, and no clear suspects. Law enforcement began to suspect they were dealing with a serial offender whose crimes had slipped through the cracks due to her careful planning and ability to remain under the radar. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team. What had initially seemed like a horrific but isolated incident was part of a much larger, more sinister pattern. The suspect was no longer just a local woman with a dark secret. She was potentially responsible for a string of disappearances and murders that spanned years and jurisdictions. The complexity of the case grew exponentially as detectives coordinated with agencies across state lines to piece together her history. The community that had once viewed her as a quiet, harmless neighbor now struggled to come to terms with the terrifying truth. How had this woman managed to live among them unnoticed? How many others might have fallen victim to her? Questions raced through everyone's minds. The case also raised difficult questions about law enforcement's ability to track and catch criminals who constantly change identities and locations. This chapter of the investigation forced a new approach. Authorities formed a task force combining resources and information from different states. They combed through decades-old cold cases, comparing details that had once seemed unrelated. Every clue mattered. They also examined her digital footprint more thoroughly, uncovering online activity that suggested a long-standing obsession with evading capture and controlling her victims. The shocking twist fundamentally changed the course of the investigation. The bodies found in the trunk were only the surface of a much deeper, darker story, one that stretched back years and crossed state borders. It became clear that justice would require more than a single trial. It would take a relentless effort to uncover the full truth behind the woman's deadly secrets and bring closure to the countless lives affected by her actions. The trial of the woman charged with multiple murders became a gripping and unsettling spectacle, captivating the attention of the nation. Evidence against her was overwhelming. Physical proof, forensic analysis, and digital records painted a chilling portrait of a calculated and remorseless killer. Yet throughout the proceedings, she remained eerily composed, offering no confession, no remorse, and no explanation. Her silence only added to the tension in the courtroom, making her seem even more inscrutable and cold. The prosecution laid out a detailed narrative, revealing the full scope of her crimes as uncovered by investigators. They described how she had carefully planned and executed her acts, how she had manipulated those around her to maintain the appearance of normalcy, and how she had moved across states to evade law enforcement. Testimonies from experts helped the jury understand the complexity of the case, the significance of the forensic evidence, the meaning behind the ritualistic markings on the victims, and the psychological profile of a killer who operated in the shadows for years. Families of the victims attended the trial, carrying the weight of years filled with unanswered questions and heartbreak. For many, this was the first time they heard the full details of what had happened to their loved ones. Their pain was palpable, but so was their determination to see justice served. The courtroom became a place where long-buried truths finally came to light. Throughout the trial, defense attorneys tried various strategies, attempting to cast doubt on the evidence or question the reliability of witnesses. However, the sheer volume and consistency of the evidence made these efforts largely ineffective. The suspect's refusal to speak or show emotion made it difficult for her legal team to build a persuasive defense. The jury faced the daunting task of deciding the fate of a woman who seemed both ordinary and monstrous at once. When the verdict was finally announced, it brought a measure of closure. She was found guilty on multiple counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The decision was met with a mix of relief and sorrow. While justice had been served, the scars left by her actions would linger in the community for years to come. In the aftermath of the trial, law enforcement agencies undertook a thorough review of old missing persons cases, hoping to identify any additional victims. The woman's pattern of deception and movement had allowed her to slip past many investigations, but with her behind bars, authorities believed they could finally close several cold cases. The community slowly began the process of healing, though the memory of the terrifying discovery during that routine traffic stop remained vivid. This case served as a grim reminder of the darkness that can hide beneath everyday appearances. It highlighted the importance of vigilance and persistence in law enforcement and the need to listen carefully to those who raise concerns about missing loved ones. For the families affected, justice was a long-awaited answer, but the emotional toll would never fully fade. The traffic stop that had seemed so ordinary on that quiet night had exposed a nightmare that spanned years, states, and countless lives. What began as a moment of suspicion led to the unraveling of a sinister web of secrets and crimes. The story of the woman and the bodies in her trunk would be remembered as a chilling example of how evil can sometimes hide in plain sight and how even the smallest actions can reveal the darkest truths.